All right, the next section, pages 17 to 26. The Thief, Mexico City, 1967. How many years have passed from 1875? On the second floor of the Buena Fortuna Hotel, a fat, pudgy man with a fancy mustache sat quietly at a wooden table in the center of the room. The delicate fingers of his left hand raced like spiders over a news article in La Prensa, the daily Mexican newspaper. Keeping rhythm with an overhead fan, the Pasha shooed flies with a sweat-stained fez. The creaky chair he sat upon teetered annoyingly because one of its legs was too short. He had carefully placed a towel over the chair so as not to dirty his perfect white suit. Except for his crooked, buttered-colored teeth, he stood out in contrast to the dirty surroundings of room 203. He was internationally known as the Pasha. In one corner of the room, a sickly-looking Mexican sporting a black eye patch lay on an old iron bed festooned with deadly springs and a thin, stained mattress. Every now and then he tried adjusting his body, but always seemed to find an angry bedspring that would maliciously dig into him no matter how he turned. Approaching footsteps on the rasping hallway floor outside their room brought each man's attention to the flimsy door. As the footsteps stopped, the door opened to reveal a lanky, weather-beaten man wearing cargo shorts and well-traveled sandals. On his shoulder was a colorful parrot, perched comfortably, but scanning the room like it was in danger. A tattoo of an anaconda snake curled noticeably around the left ankle of the man, and a shiny black obsidian arrowhead hung from a leather cord around his neck. With his unusual green eyes, he calmly looked over the hotel room, stopping briefly on the tiny Mexican on the bed. He continued looking around the room, spotting a pitcher of water on a small table near the window. Walking over to it, he sent his parrot to the table with a slight shrug and poured himself a glass of water. With the glass in one hand, he walked back to the thin door, quietly pushing it shut with his foot. "Did they lose your reservation at the Hotel Pasha?" he teased. Motioning towards the door, the man added, "Nice security. I've seen thicker rice paper." It gave him pleasure to bother the fat man. "Where have you been, Remigio?" asked the Pasha, stretching his neck and working hard to hold his temper. Remigio, sipping the liquid from his glass, quickly spat it out, sending a spray of warm, dirty water that landed all over the little man on the bed. And in his rush to get to his feet quickly, the one-eyed Mexican had managed to poke himself severely in the rear from one of the angry bed springs. Remigio simply tossed the glass onto the vacated bed. "Never mind where I've been. The important thing is I got your message. Who's he?" Both men looked at the scrawny fellow who was furiously rubbing his butt and staring with evil intent at Remigio. "That's Felipe. He'll be working with us." Pasha handed Remigio the newspaper. "Read this. Mexico City, National Museum of Anthropology. Police yesterday arrested a man suspected of stealing one of Mexico's most famous archaeological works of art, the jade jaguar of Uxmal. According to official sources, the jaguar had been the centerpiece of a display of Mayan artwork. Witnesses said the suspect, described as very old and of possible Mayan descent, broke the glass display case holding the jade jaguar, setting off museum alarms. When security arrived, the suspect showed them a bomb and threatened to explode it as he walked out of the museum. Once outside, he threw the jade jaguar into a passing taxi and was quickly arrested by police. The bomb was said to have been a fake. Police are holding the suspect in the central courthouse. The suspect has not been identified and is refusing to speak. Police are still searching for the taxi. According to Jose Guzman, the man in charge of the National Museum of Anthropology, the jaguar is considered unique because of its beauty and certain characteristics not thought to be part of the Mayan culture. This was the second theft from the museum in as many weeks. Remigio set the paper down. He was also irritated, for now his plans had changed too. "Kind of funny, huh? An old man gets to it before we could." "Never mind, I'll get us something else from the museum," he assured the Pasha. "No, you won't," insisted the Pasha. "I've already got the buyer for the jaguar. And besides, security at the museum will be tighter than ever after what that old man pulled." What do you have in mind? Asked Treviso, although he thought he knew. We're going to get that peasant out of jail, and we're going to make him talk. That's what we're going to do. Make him talk, squawked the parrot. For a brief moment, everyone looked at the green and gold parrot. Treviso gave it an especially cold look. Clever bird, said the Pasha warily. Be careful he doesn't talk too much. Hold on, Pasha. When I met you last week at the museum, I thought you understood. I'm a thief. I'm not a kidnapper. Yes, I recall the meeting quite well. I thought it was odd that you knew exactly how to approach me. Are you sure we've never met? There's something about you that I find oddly familiar, questioned the ever-suspicious Pasha. Treviso did not answer the question directly. He walked over to the window and looked out into the street, remembering his old friend Pablo. His chance to seek revenge for what had happened to his childhood friend had come after 12 long years, and he needed to stay cool. The Pasha had no idea why he was really here, and he would never recognize him as the skinny, lost boy of so long ago. Forcing angry thoughts from his mind, he focused on the central courthouse across the street. Obviously, the Pasha chose this location for its proximity to the jail. It takes a crook to know a crook. Besides, everybody knows you run the numbers game here in the capital. If I hadn't found you at the museum admiring the art, I would have found you somewhere else. A guy like me is always looking to make some easy money, one way or the other. Didn't I steal the Mayan calendar for you? Forget the Jaguar. Whatever you need, I can get. I'm the best. His plan to get even with the Pasha could still work, he thought to himself. Grunted the Pasha, raising an eyebrow and still feeling uneasy from a shaky memory of long ago. What was it about this unusual-looking thief that unsettled him? I'm not going to forget about the Jaguar, and you won't be alone on this. Felipe will be with you. The Pasha snapped his fingers like castanets, and Felipe pulled out from under his crusty t-shirt a folded blueprint, handing it over to the Pasha. He then smirked at Treviso the same way a teacher's pet smirks at other students in class. But Treviso squinted in disgust, half expecting Felipe to stick out his tongue. The Pasha spread the blueprint over the table as Felipe and Treviso gathered around. These are the plans to the central courthouse, began the Pasha. The man who stole the Jaguar is in one of these cells. It's this one here, Pasha, stuttered Felipe. He pointed to the fourth cell from the left. My cousin told me. Felipe twitched nervously whenever he spoke. Treviso tried to concentrate on the blueprint, but found himself bothered and disturbed by Felipe's very dirty and chewed-on fingernails. All you two need to do is go in, get him, and bring him back here. We're minutes from the courthouse. He looked over at Treviso. That's why we're not at the Posh Hotel. We can bring him here, question him, and have him back in his jail cell by morning. Felipe's cousin is the late-night desk sergeant, and he'll let you in. The Pasha explained the details of his plan. When he finished, there was silence. Treviso finally spoke. I don't know, Pasha. Like I said, you're talking kidnapping, a jailbreak, and I'm supposed to do it with this guy? I don't think he could break out of a paper bag. Treviso raised his arm as if he were going to give the back of his hand to the little man. Felipe turned and flinched like a scared dog, exactly the reaction Treviso expected. Laughing, he kicked the one-eyed man in the shorts, sending him into the air. Felipe ran behind the Pasha, swearing in his most foul Spanish. Treviso just shook his head at the fat man. You think I'm walking into the central courthouse with this little bag of dirt? You can't be serious. You're not so tough, gringo, snarled Felipe. Where I come from, people will take your life for an insult like that. Smiling, Treviso made a fist as he moved towards Felipe. Stop it, both of you, shouted the Pasha. He pointed his pudgy finger at Treviso. Listen to me. There's still money to be made here, and this plan will work. I've made money at everything I've ever done. This will be no exception. And now, dear sunny siders, we take a break for a little background on the Pasha. Mustafa al-Baba, a.k.a., means also known as, a.k.a., Pasha, had indeed made money at every criminal caper he had ever done. Almost. He had been born 45 years earlier in Istanbul, Turkey. He was an only child whose large body made him the target of cruel jokes at an early age. Mustafa was by far the smartest boy in his class, and at the cost of even more teasing from his classmates, he'd go out of his way to correct and make fun of both teachers and students during class discussions. By the 6th grade, he was not just picked on, he was very disliked. He eventually withdrew to studies and hobbies that required no classroom setting. He studied many languages and quickly became fluent in them. He also took up painting as a hobby and found that while he was not so good at creating anything original, he was able to make excellent copies of existing works of art. He developed an excellent talent for forgery. Mustafa dropped out of school and began to work at street fairs and carnivals, selling his copies of famous artists that most people had not even heard of. Copying art was time-consuming, however, and he felt that he was wasting his time on the small artists. He decided to try for something bolder, so he worked on irises, a famous painting by Vincent van Gogh. With some very fast talk, he managed to get an audience with one of the richest art collectors in Istanbul. He hoped to sell the forgery for big money. And now a quick break. This part isn't in your book, but irises is now on painting at the Museum of Art in Minnesota, down in Minneapolis, if you wanted to see it in real life. Back to the story. Serious collectors of art will usually have an expensive piece examined by an expert. Though Mustafa felt he had made a perfect forgery, the wealthy man's art expert identified it as a fraud. The wealthy man had friends in high places, and he did not like being cheated. Mustafa, while still quite young, was forced to flee the country on a gray and overcast day. His talent for languages and telling lies, as well as his ability to forge passports and other documents, allowed him to move easily between countries as he turned to a life of crime. His parents didn't miss him. For 25 years, Mustafa Ali Baba ran illegal activities in practically every major city in the world. He sold worthless shares of stock to non-existent gold mines in Australia. He sold phony oil wells in Nigeria and bogus rubber plants and plantations in Brazil. One of his scams involved simply sending fake bills and invoices to companies for goods and services he never provided. Many of them would pay, and it might be months before they realized they were being fooled. By that time, Mustafa would be somewhere else with another identity. In one of his favorite scams, he would hang out in a bank lobby and look for wealthy depositors. Mustafa would follow them outside and get their attention. He would introduce himself as an inspector for the bank. Naturally, he had convincing identification. And then he would tell the customers that the bank teller they had just left was under investigation for stealing. They suspected the teller of improperly handling customers' deposits and withdrawals. Would they be willing to help nab this terrible person? When the customer agreed to help, the pasha would instruct them to withdraw a large amount of money and to make sure they got a receipt. His insistence on getting the receipt made everything seem safe and legitimate. After the customers left the bank, they would meet Mustafa in some public place where he would make a big production of counting the money and copying the receipt number from the withdrawal slip. He would then take the money as evidence and instruct the customers to return to the bank the following day with their receipt. The money they had lent him as evidence would then be deposited back into their accounts, along with a nice reward of $500 for their help. He would thank them for being such good citizens, and they would walk away feeling proud of themselves and also a little bit richer. The next day, of course, they would be feeling foolish. Eventually, Interpol, the International Police Organization, came to learn about him but could never learn his name. He had so many other names that he became known simply as the Pasha. He was wanted for any number of crimes, including operating numbers rackets, it's an illegal lottery game, in cities where he had managed to establish himself. That was his main activity here in Mexico City, where Felipe's family's connections had helped him to get started. He had never lost his love for art, though, and spent much of his spare time at museums around the world. It was at the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City where Remesio Treviso luckily crossed paths with Mustafa Ali Baba, the man who had killed his childhood friend. After 3 days of secret observation, Remesio suspected the Pasha badly wanted the jade jaguar, which was on special display and guarded under careful watch. Remesio knew that he would have to gain the confidence of the Pasha before he could burn him. The time to meet had come, so he decided to break the ice. "Excuse me, sir," Remesio smiled warmly, pointing to a nearby display. "Could you tell me something about that Aztec calendar?" The Pasha, annoyed by the stranger's ignorance and shabby appearance, sneeringly said, "It's a Mayan calendar. What do you want to know?" "Is it worth much?" Now that was an unexpected question, thought the Pasha. "It depends," he carefully replied after some consideration. "The value is mostly historical, but I know of a few collectors who might pay something to have it hanging on their walls, if you know what I mean." He tapped the side of his nose and looked knowingly into Remesio's unusual green eyes. He was surprised to find that their intensity caused him to feel uneasy. "If you're telling me what I think you're telling me, walk away. I'll meet you outside in 5 minutes," said Remesio. 5 minutes later, Remesio came out of the museum with the Mayan calendar. He would not explain how he stole it. The Pasha, impressed, didn't insist on knowing. However, just as Remesio had hoped, the Pasha wanted to talk about the jade jaguar. The Pasha would not let on how important it was for him to have the jade jaguar of Uxmal, or the huge amount of money that he stood to gain. Like many criminals, and just about all con artists, Mustafa Ali Baba had a very big ego. He felt as if he were special. The rules did not apply to him. If he needed to engage in an activity that was misleading, illegal, or immoral, it was okay with him. If he had to step on people's toes, double-cross, or even get rid of them to have his way, he had no problem with that. His ego demanded that he always got his way. Right now, it was important for him to have the jade jaguar. It didn't matter if he had to betray Remesio or Felipe along the way. Now, back to the story. Looking directly at Remesio and Felipe, the Pasha folded up the blueprint. "If you two can follow our plan, we will have the old man back here in a few hours. Once we get him to give up the location of the jade jaguar, we'll be rich men. Or at least I will," he thought to himself with wicked delight. Remesio looked over at his parrot and whistled. It immediately flew to his shoulder. Smiling, he tipped his hat and left. Soon the Pasha would pay. Glaring at Felipe, who seemed to be waiting for additional instructions, the Pasha shouted, "Well, what are you waiting for? Stay with him!" The Pasha could feel that his blood pressure had risen like mercury in a thermometer on a scorching hot day. Sitting back down, he wiped the sweat from his large, shiny brow. Why did that old man have to get involved?